It's been a long time coming, but today is finally the day that I'm planting the UNS Dual 60 that I've been dark starting for the last 5 weeks. If you're new to the channel, welcome. And if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for your support. So like I mentioned at the beginning, in this tank I decided to try a dark start. I've never done this method before, and I've seen a lot of people have success with it. So I figured, why not give it a shot? The only downside is that it took 5 weeks for this tank to cycle. And I don't know about you, but 5 weeks of having an empty tank running with water in my gallery was just brutal for me to see. Every time I looked at it, it just made me sad that there weren't plants in there and I had to keep waiting. And just like all my other builds and my aquascapes, the plants have graciously been provided by the folks over at Boost Plant. So massive shout out to those folks for supplying me with all these awesome plants to build these aquascapes. All right, so there's a lot of plants going into this tank. So let's take a look at what we've got. First up is the Anubias Nana Petite. This is quickly becoming one of my favorite plants in this hobby. And for this particular build, I'll be adding it into all the cracks and crevices of the hardscape. Next up on the list is some Christmas moss. I've tried quite a few types of moss in my time aquascaping, but for some reason, I always come back to the Christmas moss. It looks and grows beautifully, and if you keep it trimmed really low to the hardscape, it really represents the type of moss you'd see here in the Pacific Northwest forests. Boost Plant sent me one of their large golf ball portions, and I gotta say, not only does this moss look healthy, but the large portion is huge. Here's my hand for size reference. I've got some Sterogyne repens in tissue culture form here, and I think that this will be a nice little background plant, and they really represent the low ground cover plants that are here in the Pacific Northwest as well. I've got 2 tissue culture cups, which should be plenty of plants once broken up, and if it's not for any reason, I've got some in another tank that I can pull from. Okay, so moving on, there's 3 pots of Hydrocotyl tripartita, or also Hydrocotyl Japan. Now this is a plant that I've never kept before, but I believe that it will really look right at home in the PNW style forestscape, and that's Pogostemon helferi downoi. Now I know I butchered that name, but I've never claimed to be a scientist, so just bear with me on this. Now for the crown jewel plant that I'm probably the most excited to have in this setup, and that's the mini Bolbitis. I absolutely love this plant. I'd argue that it's my favorite plant in the entire hobby. I've kept it before in a low-tech system, and not a day goes by where I don't regret giving it all away. I'll be putting this all over the tank, and it'll definitely be one of the main plants in this system. So I've still got a lot of plants to unbox, but this is starting to take a while. So I'm just gonna speed through the rest, and we'll get into planting. Before I get to planting though, I need to make sure the glass in the hardscape is clean. So I'll be using my algae scraper for the glass and then a toothbrush over all the hardscape. Now since this tank was dark started, after I've scraped the glass and brushed off the hardscape, I'll need to do a water change. And I'm gonna bring most of the water out of this tank, leaving only about 1 inch or so in the bottom. This will give me a chance to plant all the plants in the soil without having any floating issues or stirring anything up that could make the tank dirty. So it's just a good time to do this tank's first water change. So I'm gonna do that, and then we'll get to planting. So the first plant was the Eliocarus bellum, and this is a type of dwarf hairgrass, so it should stay pretty short. I've got 5 tissue culture cups that I'll be planting, and that will create a nice small carpet in this setup. So literally 2 hours later, all the grass is now planted. My hands hurt after planting all this. There's a lot there so far. That's 5 tissue culture cups worth. So now that that's done, it's time to move on to the next plant. So next I'll be planting the Sterogyne repens, and this is gonna be my background plant. I wanted something that wasn't gonna grow too tall, and it would transition nicely between the dwarf hairgrass carpet and the back of the tank. Next up is the Cryptocoryne parva, and this is a slow growing plant. I love the little details on it though, so I'll be using it as a detail plant. So putting it in the front sections of the tank and any little corner or crevice that I can find that I think it would add nice detail to. At this point while planting, I had to get out my aerosol misting spray and really keep those plants moist, because the last thing you want is for your tank to dry out while you're planting it. Next up is the Pogostamen, and this is going to be primarily one of the main accent plants in this tank. I think it really will represent the Pacific Northwest ferns well, and I'll be planting them in small little bunches here and there. Now let's move on to the epiphyte plants. I'll be using the Anubias nana-petit as the primary epiphyte plant in this tank. You can attach these plants 3 ways. You can either tie them, glue them, or wedge them into cracks and crevices of the hardscape naturally. And I'll be doing the 3rd way, wedging them in naturally. Now it was time for a second mist down of the tank. This is needed, especially with the Anubias plants. And now it's time to plant the Bulbitis. Just like the Anubias nana-petit, I'll be placing these in the cracks and crevices and not gluing or tying them down. I really want to plant this tank as naturally as possible. So after the epiphytes, the planting is done and it's time to fill up the tank again. Six hours later, and this tank is finally complete. It's sitting behind me. You can see a glimpse of it. I'll give you a full detailed look in a second, but I'm really happy with how this turned out. It took me a lot longer to plant than I thought it would, but I'm very pleased with the result. I ended up opting out of the Christmas moss and the hydrocotyle tripartita. I felt like they would look good in the scape, but by the time I got to where I was here, I felt that it looked good enough, and maybe in the future I'll add it, but for right now, I think I'm gonna leave it as is and let the tank mature and grow in and then go from there. So I don't think I'm gonna touch it anymore. I'm still waiting on a couple pieces of equipment. I'll be running CO2 in this setup, as well as heavy liquid ferts from 2 Hour Aquarius. I also have a discount code for 2 Hour Aquarius, so if you want to use that and get 15% off, I'll leave it in the description below. So once again, huge shout out to Boost Plant for providing all the beautiful, healthy plants in this build. Also to Boost Plant for sending me the tank, the light. Everything you see in this build was provided by Boost Plant. So huge shout out to Boost Plant. If you want to check them out, you can use the link in my bio. It's an affiliate link, which means that any purchase through that link will be directly supporting this channel at no extra cost to you. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm really excited to see how this tank progresses, and let me know down in the comments what you think of the scape. Don't forget to like this video, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do so. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.